welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the spread of disinformation and the impact that has on society, the role of media overall. We've seen recently that as far as fake news is concerned, disinformation is concerned, misinformation, all of these are terms which are very different when, and we'll be talking about what differentiates each kind from the other, but mainly as far as disinformation is concerned, which is deliberately spreading certain misleading or biased information, the role of that overall as far as our not only society but our political realm of affairs is concerned. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about, of course, the role of law in trying to combat this kind of disinformation. We've also seen recently the government take a step to repeal PICA also. We'll be talking about that and the ramifications of that overall on media, on society, all of those things today on Perspective. I have with me Javed Jadoon, who's a senior analyst. Thank you for, Javed Siddiq, who's a senior analyst. Thank you so much for joining us today. Asad Beg, who's director MMFD. Thank you for being with us today. And also Samra Akhtar Kakakhel, who is a political analyst, also a writer, HR activist. Thank you for being with us today. Javed Sahab, as far as disinformation is concerned, I think overall we've spoken about this again, now and again on my program. We've discussed it with you also. As far as disinformation particularly is concerned, it's also, misleading information that's spread by design. And we've seen the role of that in our political, as far as politics is concerned also. And also as far as society is concerned, it's very damaging effects also. The social media angle, also, main media. Yeah. How do you see this overall in today's changing, techno realities also?
Well, I think, disinformation is being used as a tool in this day and age, and it is very unfortunate that disinformation has become so popular a tool with politicians and as well as with other state figures, and it is being used, employed to further and promote your own interests. That's very sad. In Pakistan, ever since the introduction of the social media, we have seen this phenomena growing by the day. When we had the mainstream media like newspapers and television channels, it was possible to basically filter the news, filter the information, and only those stories or those news were being disseminated among the public, which were authentic, which were documented, and they were not baseless. But the social media, the way it has spread, and it has become a very, very important tool in the hands of political figures, in the hands of political parties, in the hands of even business entities. And states are using it. The Indians, they have used this information tool against Pakistan, and a disinfo lab was discovered in Brussels. And there was a huge protest by Pakistan to the European Union that why did they allow the Indians to establish a disinfo lab in Brussels. So in Pakistan, some of the political parties, they are using this disinformation tool very effectively, and they have created social media cells. They have a huge brigade of people, particularly young people, who are familiar with this operation of social media, and they are using it very effectively to basically target their political opponents.
Right, let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Asad Beg Sahab. Beg Sahab, overall, as far as the use of this kind of disinformation is concerned, like Beg Sahab is saying, of course, we've seen in politics also, once an assertion is made, or whether it's a character assassination against politicians, whether it's claims of them having more recently taken money, all of those things, there doesn't need to be now more than ever any substantial proof. there needs to be insinuations, and then different kind of edited social media content that is floated by design, which is enough today to discredit someone, to as far as damage reputations, all of those things. Do you think that there is a way around it? Do you think that we can deal with this in some way? What are your thoughts on this overall?
I think it's a very complicated process. It's not as easy as, for instance, enacting a law. I'm now again hearing that the government is apparently thinking about legislating about misinformation or tackling it on a policy level. Now, this is very important that we reiterate it once more that legislative response against misinformation, and we've seen them that they're largely useless across the world or have been useless across the world. So I think this is one thing we need to put it out there. Secondly, you talk about what are the strategies to deal with it. Look, first off, the mainstream media needs to play its role. My friend who was speaking earlier, he mentioned how Facebook and other social media platforms, Twitter, for instance, are being used to spread the misinformation. Absolutely, right? Nobody can contest that information. But also, mainstream media has also amplified this misinformation in many ways. And if we see in Pakistan, the mainstream media, which is the mainstream television, newspapers, and other mediums, they have a far more reach than the social media platforms or internet for that matter, right? So for instance, if we have a misinformation item which is floating in isolation on Twitter, versus when that is picked up and aired as credible news by a mainstream media outlet, that has far reaching consequences and damages as opposed to the Twitter misinformation. So I think we cannot absolve the mainstream media of the misinformation
But
also,
Asad,
right? They
what about when,
even if a little
let me just interject here for 1 second. What about vlogs now? Content like there is YouTube channels that different people have. The credibility of that, also, what kind of standards are there to make sure that the information that they're spreading is accurate? Is there a fact check involved? I mean, with mainstream media, at least one knows that there are some standards, right? One should hope that there are. But in terms of that kind of content, do you think that there are any standards at all? Do we need to lay down standards? Because as far as PTA is concerned, of course, they have certain rules, certain laws, but they mainly relate to criminal behavior, as I understand it, not so much as abuse, or not so much as far as damage to reputation. All of those things are concerned. More recently, of course, we've also seen the court clamp down.
Yes. So just to answer your question quickly, first, I agree with you in terms of the bare minimum, in terms of information consumption and production, right? So that has to be there. But my point is that there are enough laws. So for instance, at this point in time, we have three different laws to deal with defamation. One is the criminal defamation, which is the part of the PPC, and then we have a civil defamation, which was promulgated as an ordinance by Pervez Musharraf, and then we have another section 20 in PICA. Right, so all these three different laws, and I'm not even talking about the mainstream media, which is television, which is dealt by PEMRA and so on. So all of these laws, they have been there. The point I'm trying to make is that we are always trying to focus on information production and not the consumption part. And as in who consumes the information? People like you and me and other people, right? What has we done to improve their understanding of media and information literacy, right? What have we done as a nation to kind of educate the citizens and masses of how to consume information and how to kind of dispel misinformation and what to be wary of? My friend was talking about the Indian Chronicles, I suppose. I think by mistake, he mentioned the Disinfo Lab's name, which is in Brussels. Disinfo Lab is actually an NGO which produced Indian Chronicles, and they kind of unearthed all the news websites which were used by Indian propagandists. But that's one key example of it, right? So how have we told our nation how to consume information which comes online and what to look for when you are looking for credible information, right? So this is one of the things that we need to focus on. Information production, yes, but more so on information consumption, because we are a country of 220 million people, right?
Okay, let me come back to you on that very interesting note. I'm going to go to Samra Akhtar. Samra, I hope you've been listening to what Asad Beg is saying. He's talked about information consumption. as a concept, it's relatively new, to someone like me. When I think about, content consumption or information consumption, do you think, a country like Pakistan, where as far as education is concerned, Samra, can you hear me? I think there's a problem with audio. Javed Saab, I'll come back to you. Javed Saab, do you think that it's realistic to expect a country like Pakistan to have that kind of content consumption or information consumption that one should ideally have?
Well, I think firstly, I want to respond to my learned friend who was speaking before me, that the mainstream media, I don't think they are playing a very important role or a key role in spreading disinformation. I'm talking of the newspapers and the electronic media. The newspapers have a system in which, the news is filtered before it is printed.
There are standards. There have to be, right?
There are gatekeepers, there are editors who are sitting, and if a story bounces, if a story is rebutted, it brings a bad name to a newspaper or news organization which is respected by the readers. And the credibility of that newspaper or news entity is damaged beyond imagination. So they are very conscious and careful. Similarly, the electronic channels, which are well known and they are believed and they are credible, they don't indulge in this thing deliberately or consciously. Sometimes it happens. But as far as social media is concerned,
there's no check.
There's
no check really.
And the YouTube you mentioned, almost every third person is on the YouTube, and the content
have their own, and that those YouTube channels. My point is, are there really any checks?
There are
you
no
can
checks.
say anything about anyone.
This PECA law, which was being considered, and which was so controversial, and the PTI government came under heavy criticism by all and sundry, that why this is being done, and it's a draconian law and which is not acceptable. Even the political opposition was so critical of it. But something had to be in place.
Right, let me come back to you.
Some checks have to be there.
On that note, I'll come back to you. Ji, I think Samra is back with us. Samra, can you hear me?
Yeah, hello, hi.
Samra, overall, as far as checks are concerned, the point is that really what it boils down to is, balancing your right to information, free speech, all of those things against having, some sort of a check on spreading of this kind of disinformation. Overall, we've seen the effects of disinformation. We've also seen, recently, in a lot of cases as far as damage to reputation, defamation, awards also, internationally also we've seen, organizations being awarded against. But as far as social media is concerned, do you think that there are any checks at all in place at this time? Ji Samra, can you hear me? No, I don't think so. Ji, Asad, I'm going to go back to you and ask you that same question. Do you think it's realistic? You said that there should be some content consumption or information consumption, and do you think that it's realistic to expect that kind of standard from a country where the education level is where it is, and everybody, literally everyone, has a phone, and therefore access to that kind of disinformation, also misinformation?
Look, I think it's, again, unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. Let me just say that. There is no one fix, one kind of a standard solution that's a fix-it-all solution that you can apply on any kind of a scenario, for instance, this one, and we can expect it to work. Unfortunately, it's not like that. It's very complicated. I agree with you that there needs to be some form of standard. So,
where there have to be some kind of checks now, because we have, there's really no, there's no bar on anybody getting up tomorrow and saying anything about you, me, anyone, making up facts, even editing videos, making
I
assertions.
was coming to that. Yes, I was coming to
Ji,
that. So, what is
ji.
that bare minimum that we are asking here, right? So, the bare minimum we are asking is that any form of speech which comes under defamation or incitement to violence, or which can damage anyone's reputation or can cause physical harm to them, because we've seen physical harm causing by the speech and by the actions, and in even the references of people in the past, right? So this is the kind of bare minimum that we expect. And so this kind of this action is essentially called online harms, or harms in in the lingo that we use, right? So basically, we want that any speech that is harmful to another person should not exist, or should be penalized, or should be dealt with according to the law, right? So what can we do? First off, I think it's mainly a matter of improving the law and justice, and the procedures through which the laws are invoked in Pakistan. For instance, there is a defamation law in Pakistan, as I've already pointed out, which is also there are two kinds of laws: a civil law and a criminal law. Now we've seen in countries like UK that the defamation laws are dealt with very smoothly, right? And the reprimandations and other kind of sort of justices is delivered very quickly in cases like that. And if there is a media entity involved, they're made to publish an apology of the news item or any statement that they've posted or sort of published or broadcasted that can harm the reputation of other people.
Right.
How does defamation work in Pakistan? Unfortunately, it takes years upon years upon years for any case to go through, right? And then basically, ultimately, you don't get anything, right? So the efficacy of law is the question, not the existence of the law. And that we need to have to make sure that how does that efficacy will improve, and how do the laws work. Having more laws really isn't the answer. The answer is that whatever laws you have, how do we use them, how are they implemented. We've seen that the defamation law, specifically the criminal defamation law, has been used in the previous term and the previous term and the previous term against journalists, against human rights defenders, and against the whole lot of people who were critical of the government voices, right? Is that the history of? So these are the kind of historical intentions that we've seen for the defamation law. So the point
But
I'm trying
Asad,
to
isn't
make
that a
is
circular
that really
argument?
the efficacy of the. Yes, Mara, go on.
I'm saying, isn't that a circular argument? Because then essentially you're talking about law reform, you're talking about efficacy of laws, you're talking about our justice system and its own failures, for which again, then we talk about a long-term reform, which, is also like a long-term solution. In the meantime, there are people with phones and there are reputations being destroyed every day. There isn't any check, there isn't a way of, clamping down on any content whatsoever, where it comes from. A person with a phone can edit, can do, bare minimum anyone can do, right? Let me just come back to you on that note. I want to take Javed Saab's opinion on it. Ji, Javed Saab.
Well, I think this is an age of citizen journalism. As you have said, anybody who has an Android phone can be a journalist.
Right.
And we have seen this, and we are seeing this happening on daily basis. And there is no authenticity in which, to the content that is being spread among the people, particularly at the people level. And we have to have some law, some regulation in place to check it. Recently, the Federal Investigation Agency has apprehended about a dozen people belonging to Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf who were allegedly spreading misinformation, disinformation, and they were actually involved in a propaganda campaign against some institutions, sensitive institutions of Pakistan. So this is happening in Pakistan invariably and frequently, and nothing is being done. I mean, there is no law for that matter. The PICA became very controversial and it has been withdrawn, and the current government is basically thinking to wrap it up, to write it off. And therefore, I think we need to think about it. The lawmakers, the experts of this field, media field, they should sit together and find out how to deal with it and how to check this dissemination of disinformation among the people of Pakistan, particularly the young people.
Right, let me come back to you. We have with us Arif Chaudhary Saab, who is a senior lawyer. Arif Saab, as far as PICA is concerned, I think we had a discussion with you on it earlier on, and overall there was an opinion among media personnel, among journalists, that it was draconian. There is, of course, now that this government has decided to do away with that. But having said that, I'm sure that this government also feels that there are some checks needed in this field. And I was earlier talking to Asad Beg, and he was saying that there seems, it's about the kind of content you consume also, educating our society about that. And also, particularly about the fact that, when you talk about laws, and you are more familiar with this than anybody else, as far as delay is concerned, as far as the efficacy of our, judicial system pertaining to libel, slander, all of those things, it's not efficacious, and there are problems there. When we talk about amendment, it's a circular argument. You talk about law reform. So what is the way to deal with this, in your opinion, as a lawyer?
Yeah, first of all, the institution itself have to look after on this, these issues, because, it's not only that you can stop people, from spreading information or disinformation or misinformation about the institutions. If the integrity is proven by the institution itself, I don't think that, anybody can spread any misinformation and can defame them, That is precisely, my point of view. So far, what I have seen, that, the institutions themselves are getting involved into those controversies which do not come within their domain, practically, jurisdiction domain. And when they enter upon those areas which are forbidden for them, then naturally people, can take the advantage, because they are already, are hitting the ball which they should not. So this is what is happening, and I've seen it, because as far as our courts are concerned, the quality of judgments and, the dispensation of justice is a big question mark right now, because, so many cases are pending, and, even those where are issues, very delicate issues. I can quote one example of a small little suckling baby where I requested the Chief Justice that the case should be heard, at an early date, maybe today. And the Chief Justice said, no, sorry, this is not our policy. When we see all these things that, where these issues relating to, human, rights and fundamental rights are concerned, and basic needs of very poor people and those who are really have-nots, or in many cases cannot afford the proper lawyers or, help of advocates. There we see that things are not being done the way it should be done. And, people of Pakistan are clamoring for justice.
If you talk about, that is true as far as the failure of judicial system is concerned, but particularly when you talk about, for example, I think it's important to talk about women, specifically women who are in a public arena, who are in, also politics, also in a public life in any capacity. Defamation against them, slander against them, video tampering, character assassinations, those are very real realities, unfortunately, of our societies today. And, it doesn't matter from which strata of society you come from. You could come from the very top. We've seen, horrendous videos. We've seen horrendous content being circulated, regarding, it doesn't matter who you are in that stead. And very recently, we've also seen that, and there is more and more. What I want to talk about is that, it's brazen. There is brazen kind of acceptance of it now. It's not something that is frowned about. It's not something that is being said no to. Even when Asad talks about content consumption, there is nobody there are very limited people who will say, look, don't send me this, or I don't want to watch this, or don't circulate this, even on groups. For the sake of a laugh, or the, sensitizing about this issue. How important is it? Having a deterrence effect as far as laws are concerned, how important is it?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the women in Pakistan are taken for granted as far as defamation are using words against, defamatory words against them are concerned. People do not really care, because basically the society is gender, discrimination oriented. Pakistan, we always, our religion, as through the mouth of demagogues, it starts from talking about the woman and it ends at the woman. Instead of talking about equality of women, as even it is mandated by Islam, I don't think that there is any discrimination in man or woman. Even as far as the hadiths of prophets are concerned, there are very, very clear verdict of prophet that, as far as knowledge is concerned, as far as progress in society is concerned, our participation in normal day-to-day working is concerned, there is no discrimination. But unfortunately, our leadership, religious leadership, they do not talk that particular area. They are always bent upon to talk about, in the name of sagacity or, in the name of morality or whatever they call it. But they are bent upon to talk about discrimination about the woman, and they just don't want that woman to be
because there are no
taken.
checks, are there? I mean, is it because whoever is spreading this information, whoever is circulating this content knows that there is no culpability, there's not going to be, no one's going to hold them responsible. So that is where it's stemming from, right?
Yeah, that's the reason. Mainly, because it is said very, very commonly that severity is not the deterrent. It is, actually the punishment, the surety, guarantee that everybody who commits a crime shall be punished, will be dealt in accordance with law. No matter whatever you talk about,
But Arif Sahib, you are just saying, you are talking about how there's a dearth of efficacy of laws anyway, right? So it doesn't matter, that whole question of the law being in place, of being held responsible, all of those things. Let me come back to you.
I don't think that,
Ji.
dark area as far as, the laws are concerned. Laws are available. There's no dearth of laws, but until and unless you really change the orientation of the society and, until and unless you give full protection to a woman, not only protection, but give her a full status in the society, the laws cannot work, because even if you have the woman as a leader, people, she has to cross the gender barrier first. Then it will come to her competence, and that's the happening with this poor strata of the society. So I think,
okay, Arif, let me come back to you. I don't agree with you on that, but I will come back to you. Javed Sahab, whether the status of women and the fact that, of course, the equality of it, I agree with Arif Sahab to the extent that it's not there. But the point is that this is not just about women. It's happened to men also. More to women. Of course, they're more vulnerable in that stead. But it's happening all round.
I think
doesn't.
the ugliest part, ugliest part of all this is that disinformation is being accepted by the society as a legal or an accepted tool to defame others, to basically target others, particularly in the field of, in the arena of politics. Some of the political parties, they have created social media brigades. They call them social media brigades to target their political foes, political rivals. And how to check it? That needs to be done, and that needs to be taken care of. And the state and the society and the lawmakers and media personals, they should sit together and try to find out some way to basically check this disinformation, which hurts you, which defames you, and which destroys your reputation.
And once it's there, it doesn't matter. Let me come back to you. Asad, I want to ask, what particularly, when you talk about content consumption or educating people about content consumption, what do you mean, and what are the ways we can actually do it, in your opinion?
Look, Marukh, that's one of the things that we can do. Let me also say that I've never said it, and neither am I saying that the laws should not be implemented, right? Or the people should not be made accountable for their actions. That's very important. You also talked about women. Now, for instance, if somebody posts a picture, an edited or Photoshop picture of a woman online, which kind of degrades her and creates a lot of harm for her, I don't think that's a defamation issue. That's a criminal problem. And we have that clause under the Section 21 in PICA, which specifically talks about superimposing a photograph or a face of a natural person, right? So we have these laws. My friend, I think, referred to something about PICA being abolished. PICA is very much there. PICA ordinance, which was promulgated by PTI, that was rolled back on the orders of CJ of the Islamabad High Court. But the
Right.
PECA, the original PECA, which was drafted by the PMLN government in 2016, that's very much there and being implemented by FIA. Now, FIA has also done, as you would know, a lot of cases against sexual harassers online and so on. That needs to be improved, and so obviously I won't go into the argument of the capacity of FIA itself and the challenges that they have, but generally, in my view, the problem of the implementation of the laws is the biggest culprit that we have in this equation. Now, you talked about um, uh, reformations, obviously in terms of education and literacy of the people. Now, listen, Maruk, my point is that we are again a country of 220 million people, right? And we have been talking about media and information literacy for at least 5 years now, right? And countries which thought that media and information literacy could improve their general population sort of understanding of misinformation, so on, like Sri Lanka and others, they added that in their curriculum in the very beginning, right? In the very sort of middle school education level, they started teaching the children of how to consume information, how to stay away from misinformation, and how it can be very sort of dangerous and whatnot, right? My point is we have never done that. You rightly mentioned the literacy levels of the country also in your conversation. So my point is that everything is right for a perfect storm then, right? People are promulgating misinformation for their own benefits. Political parties, like my friend pointed out, they have their quote unquote own brigades of social media trolls and whatnot. So then we have a perfect storm. So how to deal with that? In my view, we have to sort of do a multi-pronged strategy. One of the
Okay.
biggest things that we are missing right now is the education part. We have laws, the agencies and the law enforcement groups have been implementing it. The judiciary has have been sort of passing judgments and whatnot. The only part we are not working on is the literacy part. Now we need to start working on that, and we need to sort of basically put together a team of people, team of educationists, people who understand this problem, and they need to come up with a solution of whether we want to do it formally through the formal education in schools and public sort of spaces and whatnot, or we want to do it informally through social media campaigns, for instance, or through campaigns on the radio or television or the mainstream media. How misinformation can be dangerous and what are the ways of sort of tackling it or challenging it. There are numerous studies on it and numerous sort of curriculum made by various groups, including the ones that are made by UNESCO, for instance, right? So there are a lot of resources available. The only point is, how do we go about it? And that's the big question that I think this government also needs to address.
Okay, let me come back to you. Arif Saab, as far as the role of judiciary is concerned, do you think that, as far as laws are concerned, you've said it, Asad has said it, Javed Saab has also said it, overall there is agreement that there are enough laws. In terms of clamping down on this kind of journalism, if one can call it that, or this kind of content being floated, do you think that the judiciary can play a significant role? Because if you see judgments coming quicker, you see people being held accountable quicker, it will have a deterrence effect overall on society, on this kind of content being just floated around randomly.
MARUKH, justice system starts with the registration of a criminal case. And as the capacity of those, who register the case and then investigate. As far as these laws are concerned, cyber crimes in many ways, in many cases, it covers it. But as far as our agencies are concerned, I being a practitioner, law practitioner, I can quote you examples that, I had that experience of sending more than 3 complaints, with regard to this cyber crimes to, FIA. So, and it's now almost maybe 3 years, and in one case 4 or 5 years. I have not heard anything happening on that, because they just, I don't know how other people are facing this kind of situation, because no matter, you have so many laws, but until and unless the investigation agency is apt and they are quick in action, how can you get it implemented? And then they do not submit challan, in time. The court will take cognizance only once the challan is submitted before it, and they produce the witnesses. But if they don't find that the prosecution doesn't do its job, then how can court do its bit? Because that is the problem which we are facing. It is a multi-dimensional problem. It's not one-way
What's the
problem.
solution
First,
in your opinion, Arif sir?
yeah, solution, first of all, the government, whosoever is in the government, they should take the responsibility that, its number one priority should be criminal administration of criminal justice. Because, and for that, they should take, the control, and judge making should not be dependent upon the 18th Amendment. We have to come a little, up. And, because until and unless we start from the process of selection of judges, it should, we cannot get the result, because, the number of judges really matters. But the quality of judgment you can get only through a competent and honest judge. And the judge of integrity can only come through those who are not aspiring for this office, and who are not running after these political bosses to get this assignment. This should have been always a sacred trust for which people did not aspire. But it was the Chief Justice who could recommend those who were really well into it, and he considered them, the real persons, who are honest and the men of integrity, and he would recommend them. And in one case, I remember, way back, many years, I think, Chief Justice recommended the name of one gentleman, and he called him to his office and said, he didn't say anything, Chief Justice, but the gentleman came to know that his name had been recommended. That lawyer went to see the Chief Justice for thanking him. And when he left the courtroom or the chamber, the judge asked his secretary to withdraw his name. He said, I was not thinking about this gentleman, that, he is aspiring for this post. I just recommended his name, that he is very honorable and he will administer justice, and he will take it as an onerous responsibility. But now you see that people are hankering after this job as a judge, and, this process, is coming through such a way which is, I don't think that can produce good judges. You have to, focus on this administration of justice from not one point of view, but from different point of view, from agencies, investigating agencies should be really trained for the job which they are doing. And then you have to have good judges, and prosecution should be competent. And, the
Overall, you're
witnesses
talking
should be
about
protected.
criminal justice reform, right?
Full-fledged reform. And until and unless you take this job, you cannot expect anything, no result. Everybody will be talking, and this is the years and
But
years
Arif sir,
have gone by since we are talking about that without result.
if you see speedy justice happen in cases like this, where they are prosecuted, of course, those are also minimal. Most people would just ignore that content. It's already had the effect that, of damaging reputations, all of those things. But once it comes to court, and once that process starts, once people see that kind of speedy justice, maybe there will be a deterrence effect.
MARUKH, you know that, in many countries, these laws are not punitive. There are not penal laws as far as the defamation is concerned. But there is a way to file a suit for damages in those countries. And that really is a deterrent for those who commit such crimes, because when they have to pay enormous amount of damages, then nobody would dare to do that. But in Pakistan, it is very unfortunate
we've also
that,
seen in a
this
few
damages
cases where the courts have actually, imposed, even if it's relatively less, the fine, but there has been fine. Citizens have been fined for cases which are superfluous, which are wasting the court's time. I think that also is a good tradition, because eventually that may filter out.
Because, the yardstick they have, they are taking into consideration. I don't agree with that, Superfluous cases are those who really think that, are not worth, filing. They should be checked, at the administrative side. And as far as the cases are concerned, once they come up before the court should decide those matters on the basis of merits. And if a case doesn't have any merit, that should be dismissed, because this is not the way to discourage people from, filing these suits, because even on that side, discrimination is being seen, is being witnesses. In many
Right,
cases,
Arasab,
in
of
similar
course,
cases,
I'll
yeah.
bow to your opinion on that, but, from a lay person's point of view or a non-practicing lawyer or what one may want to call it,
Fine.
perhaps it seems like it might have a deterrence effect. On that note, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much for being with us, Javed Siddiq Saab, Asad Beg, thank you for joining us, Arif Chaudhry Saab, thank you for being with us today. As far as the issue of disinformation is concerned, it is certainly a very, very real one at this time. It extends across the board to all political parties, to all personnel in public life particularly. It extends to women in our society, it extends to the marginalized strata of our society. It is a very real dragon now that is quite there and throwing fire. It needs to be curbed, it needs to be some kind of a restraint, certainly is the order of the day, whether we call it deterrence, whether we call it the clamping down of laws are concerned. Overall, of course, we've agreed that there are enough laws, but then we talk about the efficacy of them, the imposition of them, the timelines, all of those things, which are again an issue as far as our justice system is concerned. Of course, the media has a huge responsibility, I would say, as far as mainstream media is concerned, even those that are floating this kind of content. When you talk about YouTube channels, you talk about social media, there have to be that kind of responsibility that has to be inculcated in our society for there to be less and less minimal, this kind of content being floated around. Of course, it goes into education, that goes into content consumption, which is a very, very interesting thing which Asad Beg talked about, and I think that needs to be explored further. And I hope that everyone will think about that. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.